has a hard-on.
Perfect world was a dream between the primitive cerebral.
He's a tyrant! He's a sadist!
You're all going to die down here.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real, my beloved truth seekers. Welcome with kindness and love to Aeon Byte, the only authentic weekly radio gaga program on Gnosticism, the Gnostics, and Gnosis, as well as its brethren in the esoterica and Freethinking.
I was going to the worst place in the world and I didn't even know it yet.
Broadcast from the virtual Alexandria through the God Above God.cam, we don't take prisoners but liberate them. Aeon Byte does not attempt to make a better world. No, Aeon Byte attempts to instill a better inner life for those cast aside by the powers and principalities of a world that will never get better, that is forever part of the erotic, rabid fantasy of Sackless.
Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something.
Aeon Byte is not the final authority on anything, but hopes to be an endless possibility for everything. I am Abraxas, that terrible god above Yahweh and Satan as the ancients knew him, the stellar lord of 1,000 impossible secrets, the rooster-headed, snake-footed guardian, painted on the walls of the sleeping pharaohs of Giza, and etched on the seals that protected the forbidden secrets of the Knights Templar, the origin of the word abracadabra, the sanity-destroying personification of the pleroma, and the name of a really bad sci-fi movie with Jesse Ventura. I am your madness, I am you, and we are legend and we are the revenge of the myth. Hell-bent but heaven exiled.
We are not of one mind, but we now speak with one voice.
And as Gnostics, knowers of the unknown, metaphysical stargazers and noetic poets, we continue to write our own gospel and live our own myth, because if we don't, some agent, earthly or unearthly, will do that for us. The machine will ask us, what did we dream? And before we can answer, it will say, it's all right, we told you what to dream. The empire never ended, my beloved true seekers, and we are those secret Christians of the Thomasine cabal that see with our third reptilian eye through the holographic seduction of hating angels and societal robber barons.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
Most religions spoon-feed you all the answers you think you need, strapping you to theological high chairs you'll never outgrow. But Gnosticism offers you flea for answers and an elephant stampede of questions you yourself must answer. The only real answers you'll usually end up on your urine-stained lap are, keep asking more questions, keep reevaluating, reinterpreting, and reconstructing your inner and outer realities. Keep piercing the veils of perception around you until you find a place of movement and meditation where you can finally know yourself once and for all. And the most important answers, perhaps, keep asking more questions until the truth burns away all that conditioning, all the virtual false systems around you, including your ego.
Okay, I'll tell you everything, and you tell me everything, and maybe we can get through all the piss and shit and lies that kill other people.
On this approximately Saturday, March 6th, the year of our Demiurge 2010, we deal with Satanism and the Luciferian path. beyond the cliches and misunderstandings of evil for the sake of evil and rebellion for the sake of rebellion, Iron Maiden album covers, or Gary Gygax role-playing games, or Nine Inch Nail lyrics. We go beyond Halloween pageantry or goth-keeping with the Joneses, and the imagery of orgies where babies are sacrificed to... Wait, that's what Orthodoxy has said about the Gnostics throughout history. And female shamans, and Knights Templar, and homosexuals and Jews. Hecate. Orthodoxy has even said that about orthodoxy whenever one faction got up from the wrong side of Pat Robertson's golden bed.
You know, I don't know about this doctrine of assassination, but if he thinks we're trying to assassinate him, I think we really ought to go ahead and do it. It's a whole lot cheaper than starting a war.
Ah, what did you dream? It's all right, we told you what to dream. The empire never ended. Please allow me to introduce our astral guest in this eternal now. This is Winter Lake, author of The Satanic Paradigm and Xena LaVey, The Fallen Daughter. Winter is also an accomplished screenwriter, novelist, occultist of many stripes, and a damn fine tarot reader from personal experience. Winter will grant us a valuable circuit into Satanism, as well as explain his new book, The Satanic Paradigm, which, although targeted for more veteran devil worshippers, it contains some great research, spell work, and startling evidence about several prominent historical figures and their relationship to Mephistopheles, some of them including Harry Houdini, members of the Nazi Party, H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, Rasputin, and, sorry Wiccan soccer moms, Gerald Gardner.
We have found the witch, may we burn her?
But the truth is we cannot thoroughly cover this esoteric creed in one ejaculation, simply because there are too many denominations and strands of it. There are mystic Satanists, atheist Satanists, and lunch slices sandwiched in between. There is the Church of Satan, the Temple of Set, and the Order of Nine Angels, and countless independent covens sprinkled about.
You know, I was the one who created hell.
I know that, your hatefulness.
But actually, the credit for starting hell belongs to my first wife, you know? She was the inspiration.
And of course, you have to include the precursors of the modern old-knit clubs like the Theosophical Society, the OTO, and the Hellfire Club. And no, I don't mean the mutants that fought the X-Men and screwed up Jean Grey. What is evident as a morning erection is that they are founded around the god image of the figure known as Satan, the great adversary or accuser, although not necessarily the standard Judeo-Christian Satan, although that is probably a starting point for many who break out of fundamentalism by oddly remaining in the same mythos of fundamentalism.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm the devil!
But Satan, or Iblis in Islam, is not only pre-Christian but pre-Judaic, since after all the religion of circumcision borrowed heavily from other ancient cultures. Satan is simply the archetypal incarnation of the chaotic forces of the multiverse, the trickster god whose gifts cut both ways and can corrupt dudes' weakened spiritual constitution. He is the revealer of mysteries for those who dare to travel deep into the potential of human imagination and far into the astral realms. Satan has gone by many names, identities, genders, and roles, but ultimately, he is as much part of our being as is the God of justice himself.
Nah, I'm not into evil and torture and all that stuff. Plus, a Prince of Darkness should have sort of a distinguished look to him, and let's face facts, I'm no George Clooney.
What my larva brain gets is that one of Satanism's goals is to lubricate the part of our psyche that has been repressed by the steel moral laws of the Puritan faiths, leaving mankind in no better condition than Scottish rape sheep, uncreative golems, and unimaginative sock puppets.
See, it's no good, Monty. We've all got to be alike. The only way to be happy is for everyone to be made equal.
Carl Jung warned that denying our shadow, the charged aspect of our unconscious seeking reintegration, ultimately leads to disastrous projections upon those who are weaker than us. Nietzsche bemoaned that humanity had divorced its Dionysian aspect and embraced too much Apollonian characteristics, thus becoming unbalanced and entrenched into the safety of conservatism and unhealthy stoicism.
You shall know that God is God, and bow down to his will.
Other traditions like certain schools of Shintoism and Sufism, specifically the Jerahi Halveti order, warn that not dealing with our more mischievous and innovative selves makes people into boiling kettles of suppressed passion. And we've all seen examples of what happens when the kettle pops from the falls of pious religious and political leaders, entire communities, and people we all just know.
Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition.
A few programs ago in Gnostic Cinema Part 3, Jake Horsley gave a Gorgon-solid argument that not dealing with the id is what has made civilization schizophrenic, paranoid, and fragmented, out of touch with all realities and drenched in an existentialist fog. Mark Twain put it all simply when he wrote, "There are several good protections against temptations, but the surest is cowardice."
We say, love your brother. We don't say it, really, but...
We don't literally say it.
No, we don't say it.
We don't really literally mean it.
The warning is clear, my beloved truth seekers. Jehovah, Zeus, Allah, Indra, Zenu, and the other phallic gods have hamstrung our collective anima with their Isaiah fiats and hellish good intentions because they plain just don't like us.
That God does not like you, never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you.
And valorous mystics have fought throughout history to rent the veils of soul censorship and shoot a flare in the night skies of mere being. Winter's The Satanic Paradigm is such a clarion call. The book not only urges humanity to become roaming wolves of the forests of wonder instead of chattel in the slaughterhouses of our mind-buggering leaders and teachers, it predicts that humanity will reach a higher state of consciousness where Bronze Age morality and Stonehenge laws are but afterthoughts, where individuals with unalienable rights can internally explore their magical and logical capacities to the fullest, evolve spiritually into their next phase.
I'm going to show you a world without sin.
I think one passage of the Gospel of Philip addresses what I've been babbling about, perhaps with a slightly different degree than Satanism. Here it be. Light and darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. They are inseparable. Because of this, neither are the good good, nor evil evil, nor is life life, nor death death. For this reason, each one will dissolve into its earliest origin, but those who are exalted above the world are indissoluble, eternal.
Good and evil, there never is one without the other.
Satanism does acknowledge, with the exception of its atheist branch that embraces pragmatism, hedonism, and Epicureanism, the supremacy of the Creator God. Yet it sees Jehovah as a detached clockmaker who allows lower entities to torment his children. He's a workaholic dad you can't depend on, so you must find his Marlon Brando uncle, or maybe Uncle Buck. You must find his shadow side and creative aspect, and that is the morning star. You could say Satanists are basically deistic Gnostics.
Our fathers were models for God. If our fathers bailed, what does that tell you about God?
And like with Gnosticism, a Satanist can view creation in either a psychological, a mythological, or even a literal way. Yet, more like neo-pagans, the children of Orcus tend to be more tribal and less inclusive than Gnostics. But there are those like Winter, who at the end of Yaldabaoth's day bow to the supremacy of individualism and egalitarianism.
Underestimated from day one. You'd never think I was a master of the universe now, would you?
We shall deal a bit more with Satanism and Gnosticism after the interview, my beloved truth seekers. In other words, enough of my drivel, and let us welcome Winter and his discussion on the Satanic paradigm, with an old toast that Satanists, Gnostic, mystics, and freethinkers can all agree on. It goes: to absent friends, lost loves, old gods, and the seasons of the mist, and may each one of us give the devil his due. Hey, at least Mephistopheles is fair with his contracts, while Jehovah just buries us with covenants that we don't even have a choice on signing on to. The empire never ended. What did you dream? It's all right, we told you what to dream.
I'm here on the ground with my nose in it since the whole thing began. I've nurtured every sensation man has been inspired to have. I cared about what he wanted, and I never judged him. Why? Because I never rejected him. In spite of all his imperfections, I'm a fan of man. I'm a humanist. I rest my case. And while you're jumping from one foot to the next, what is he doing? He's laughing his sick fucking ass off. He's a tight ass. He's a sadist. He's an absentee landlord.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us today we have Winter Lake to discuss his new book, The Satanic Paradigm. How are you doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
Oh, just wonderful. Thanks a lot for joining the show. You mentioned that your book is for someone versed in Satanism, that somebody should already have a working knowledge of Satanism before opening your book. So before we delve into the Satanic Paradigm, could you give us a history of modern Satanism?
Modern Satanism has come about since about 1959. It started with Anton van der Levey and his magic circle, and it was focused mainly on witchcraft soirees and series of other type of rituals that they were experimenting with. And from the magic circle, it evolved in coming up to about 1966 into the formal Church of Satan. From that point on, 1966, on Walpurgisnacht, which is April 30th of just about every year, and Walpurgisnacht means witch's night in German, Anton van der Levey began his religion, his Church of Satan. And it is still a functioning religion as of 2010. It's had a very long and arduous history with its ups and downs, and modern Satanism has obviously evolved from that point until now into kind of just a plethora of different paths, Luciferianism, theistic Satanism, self-indulgent Satanism. So it's many, many branches of the tree have grown.
And which one do you subscribe to or lean towards?
Satanism for me is kind of like take what you can and discard the rest. You know, I take from a lot of different philosophies over the past 500 years intrinsically on Satanism, and in encompassing even the modern concepts of Satanism. So it's like I will borrow me personally from these varying different concepts and build my own precept of what Satanism is for me. I never really aspire to one set design on what Satanism is. I always aspire to be many, many different aspects. And even ironically, I am a member of the Church of Satan, although currently I am exploring, in involvement with many, many other different types of sets.
And what exactly attracted you to Satanism versus other occult paths?
When I was about 5 years old, I experienced a series of supernatural occurrences and omens. To speak of this, people would be like scratching their heads and thinking this guy's crazy. But really, they did occur for me personally. I had bat fly in my room when I was a child, and I had kept it hidden in my closet. And I had always leaned towards darker elemental experiences of storms and visceral other entities, like dead trees and so on and so on. And I felt communications with other entities. And so that was what really my natural attraction to it was. It was kind of like the borderline between where reality ends and where the supernatural begins. And it's been with me since I was a child. From my teenage years, I came in contact with Anton Szandor LaVey through letters. And later on, I learned about the 888 celebration, which Zena LaVey, who was at that time, in 1988, the high priestess of the Church of Satan, had invited me out to the 888 celebration in San Francisco, which I attended, and met a lot of interesting individuals, Boyd Rice, and people that were there. And there was a lot going on, and it was a really fun place to be at that time, and things were really galvanized. And unknown to a lot of people, there was a deeper precept behind the 8/8 celebration, other than just a big party with a lot of lab tech films and recitals and rituals and so on. It really had to do with the 1988 year itself being 1,500 years predicted in the Bible and other Gnostic texts of the overturning of the world's holy righteousness or holy politicians and just other kind of morass of individuals to Lucifer's thrall, in a sense, in 1988. And this has been very substantiated by what exactly that 1,500-year mark, which ended in 1988, was when Satan himself, as an entity or Luciferian power, became the ruler in the stead of the rulers. It's very interesting.
Is Satan a Christian or a pre-Christian figure?
Satan is as old as the world. The entity of Satan stems from Pazuzu being one of the oldest forms of demonic power on the earth, Arum and Lilith. These creatures came from the deserts of Persia and Iraq and so on, where basically the foundation of the world exists. Anton Szandor LaVey spoke of this area being the seven towers of Satan, which makes a lot of sense. And I think that it is very pre-Christian. During the medieval ages, it was more codified that Satan was an entity, and the Crusades began, and a series of events occurred that was a major backlash against any kind of experimentation into the occult in general. And I think it just got branded as Satanic, when really it was an evolution of mankind. It had to do with witchcraft. It had to do with the experimentation into other realities and astral things and occurrences of visions that people were having that may or may not have been substantiated as so-called satanic forces, when really they had to do with the mind or the experience, the evolution of humanity on a whole. As Christianity felt threatened by this, they began the sword against it, and they really carried that to the hilt through crusading, through the burnings, false accusations. Generally, this had to do with jealousy. It had to do with their position in the world being threatened by alternate ways of thinking, in my opinion.
Yeah, because in ancient times, like for example in Judaism, Satan isn't seen. Seems to be a much different character. He seems to be God's accuser, God's executioner, if you would. And the darker gods in ancient times were simply part of the whole cosmic energy, weren't they?
Absolutely. You cannot have light without the dark, and it's a very cliche thing to say, but it's very relevant. The god Pan, stemming from that concept, the god Loki, were very ambiguous figures that encompassed both good and evil. They were trickery and so on. These are basic elements of how humanity is, how humans are in general. They all have this sort of Loki or Pan within them. They have a Hecate. They have a nature about them that is both of the light and the dark. And is it benevolent, or is it really natural? I mean, who is to say? We know that it exists in humans, that this ambiguous nature exists. In certain extreme religions, like Muslimism, they totally want to slash it out. But really, they're slashing out a very elemental aspect about themselves. Muslimism, and not to diverge too much, really is kind of a very extremist concept that they have to live on this earth in the spiritual sense of this good and evil, which they attain or aspire to be non-physical and non-indulgent. Yet when they die, according to the Quran, they are able to establish themselves lustfully through the sexual relations with up to 90 virgin women. That in itself is a contradiction to the world as a whole, that you would aspire to a spiritual sexual experience when you die, yet while you're alive, when you're in a physical form, you cannot. So they have a totally twisted view of how that light and dark work together.
And the lighter side of Satanism would be the Luciferian path, the light bringer, the Prometheus kind of character?
To a certain extent, yes. Luciferianism, to bring forth Lucifuge Rufakeal, is a force for renewed enlightenment and indulgence and power here and now, and to know what you feel is real, and to expand your mental consciousness. And I think Luciferianism, coming up to especially 2050 within our time, is going to just take on a completely new evolution, because it's going to merge with technology. People are going to just be aspiring to great new cognizant psychic ability.
How do Satanists view the concept of the soul and hell?
The general satanic idea is, if you were to look at the benchmark concept, the soul is really a dead entity when they hit the dirt. Myself personally, I disagree with this. The soul for me is an ever transmigrating force that permeates the universe, that could be a part of the entire whole. And Satanism, if you were to talk with a hardcore LaVeyan Satanism or so on that would, literal word antics of the entire precept, they say it is completely now, the material is real, and there is no soul. Myself personally, I do not accept that. I see things differently. But there are, in the general steadfast definition, that is it, that the soul doesn't exist, that when you die it's dark, and that it's over. And there are other religions, too, that have espoused that. Certain Egyptian cults felt that same way, especially in dealing with other Setians.
And so, therefore, there is a transmigration of the soul, you would see. So there's no worry about eternal torment or anything like that. What's the ultimate? Is it a simple eternal return, or is there a way that eventually a soul can break out of the whole cycle, the Ouroboros, or whatever you want to call it?
In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, they speak of this quite often, and I reference this. And the Book of the Dead gives sort of an insight into how that struggle for the soul begins when death it commences. In seeing that, can you break free from death itself? I think you can do it. I think you can break from the cycle, remain whole, remain focused, and push forward. It is very hard to do because the utter confusion of death itself and the other entities that are out there to devour your energy and to push you forward or backward or any direction, it's overwhelming. It takes an entire lifetime of preparation for that kind of conflict, and that may or may not make any sense, but that's how I feel on it.
And Winter, tell us a little bit about the thesis of your book and why did you decide to write it? In other words, what exactly is the satanic paradigm and this satanic consciousness that we're evolving towards?
The satanic paradigm, I wrote it as I had seen within LaVeyan Satanism and Satanism in general, especially since LaVey's death of 1997. There's just been a lull in satanic society. Not a lot of relevant material coming forward. There is kind of general boring academia and analyzing subjective things that are regurgitated over and over again. This was my inspiration for writing the book. So I've written it, and in writing it down, I had found that there was actually a very mystical, satanic mystical consciousness to the idea of it, and what time it actually hit me to write it was around 9/99. It was in September of 2009, and it became very relevant to me. And in my experience and in my studies and in speaking with Stanton LaVey and a series of other people that are really in the know on this topic, I had come to the conclusion that 999 was extremely relevant, that it is a transformation of society, one being that 999 was the last set of sequential numbers that we're going to experience in our lifetime, probably for the next 100 and so years, and that it also kind of clicked along with previous predictions by other occultists and so on and so on, in looking at the 1966 date, which was extremely relevant, and looking at 1988, which was extremely relevant on the charts, and then looking at 2009, which is very relevant. The timing of the book was, in all honesty, random. Why it happened at the 999 point? It just did, and it ended up being very supernaturally charged. It's still very mystical to me right now. Experience is not over with, and it's very to grapple. But in looking at satanic consciousness, we could say that satanic consciousness is the world in general, as it, I guess you could say, grows more evil, in a sense. If we look around today, the world has changed into an about-face from Christian antics that have gone on, and into a series of other things. Although their grip is not completely lost, and it's actually more pervasive than it's been in the past years. It's actually stronger than it was. Its strength is gripped and loosened from time to time. Overall, the consciousness is the permutation of our universe by the forces of darkness and by a general psychic mindset on the part of humanity as a whole. That is generally what satanic consciousness is.
You also quote LaVey as saying, "I believe in God. He is just far too indifferent and disinterested in the affairs of mankind." Do all Satanists have such a lukewarm view towards Jehovah and his son?
I think that in taking that line that LaVey did, I think they do. I think they would believe that the entity per se is like, we have a painting, yet where is the painter? You know, it would be illogical to assume that if you have a painting, how did it become transcribed? It had to be created by a painter. Obviously, the painter is gone. He is elusive. He is indifferent, or he is a watchful, aware, but not really taking a complete role within humanity or the creations that are in the billions. It's a very wide open topic. It's been studied philosophically, scientifically for the past 200 years, especially, in innumerable hundreds and hundreds of different texts and diatribes. Overall, I think in making that statement, I think that Satanists do have that general volition about it and about the Son of Christ. Incidentally, most, if not all, do not accept Christ as anything more than sort of, unfortunately or fortunately, as a charlatan who was really kind of self-enfeebled to die for his own cause, to create some kind of force for himself, to propel some kind of created religion, a very passive-aggressive trait on his part.
Yeah, and I find it interesting because, as you write in your book, your view is very much with a lot of what is written in the Talmud and what a lot of Kabbalists see Jesus as, which is basically a failed necromancer, somebody who just couldn't go all the way.
Correct. Not to be just a sense of blasphemy, and not to be like, let's just keep beating on a dead horse, because really Christianity and Jesus Christ in general is a dead horse to myself personally. It's not relevant. I mean, the churches are foreclosed. The concept is dying generally. It's being beat on by the general sense of logic. The sheer logic of it is actually killing that concept. Unfortunately, other religions near it, which are much more dangerous, I feel, like Islam, is much more a threat to the indoctrination on a global scale. They wish to indoctrinate people into their regime or else. They have women in burqas. They prevent people from becoming educated. These are all primary problems that Christianity does not suffer from. And I think that in the future it's going to become more predominant that the Islamists are going to become more extremist because they want to shove the Quran down people's throats. That is something they openly say they wish to do. They target any cartoons that are drawn about them. They target any reverse literature against them, and they're a billion-plus strong religion. They're the largest religion in the world, and they are mirrored, despite what they'd like to believe. They are mirrored almost down to a T by Christianity, by a self-proclaimed son of Allah, son of God.
And Winter, your book is also, you give a lot of spell works for different reasons, rituals. What I find interesting is, unlike other occultists, location is paramount for this work to be successful. Why is location so important, especially when you're telling people to travel to Russia? It seems Russia is a big place of energy.
Absolutely. Where people and spellcasting are lost, no, you cannot stand in a back alley and proclaim the forces to come to you. It's just not relevant. You can't be in your backyard wearing a cloak while your neighbor is having a cookout. Okay, it just doesn't work. And I see people doing it. And I see even all kinds of zany things that it becomes more entertainment. It becomes more self-masturbation. Location. It has everything to do with it. Once you undertake the effort, for example, to go outside of St. Petersburg in Russia, you know you're going to get serious. There is a church there that is made of bones from the death of the Black Plague. You know it's going to get serious. If you go to Germany or Poland, and for example, and utilize the forces of, and not to really get into a Nazification of anything, the forces of Auschwitz, and you conduct some Hackenkreuz ritual there, you are going to have major empirical results. And that is really what that has to do with. There are ritual chambers and personal houses, and that is tried and true, and that works in that self-energy. But you know, that energy dwindles, and the effects over time are not as strong. You can cast that spell initially and project initially, but you will not have the same powerful results. And a lot of, practicing magicians, black, white, witches, and so on, they ask themselves this question too, and I know they ask themselves unconsciously. Why isn't my spell that is supposedly tried and true that I have done over and over again working for me? It's not working for you because that location where you're getting it is tired. It is spent. The energy is gone. You are being drained, not being projected. And so that is why I have made location very important in the book, and those efforts to undertake those locations, if they are, there are relative trade-offs to it. For example, in the book there is the Sephiroth of Set, which is a ritual which ideally would be done near Karnak in Egypt. It would be amazing. The power is there. The energy is focused. The people that travel there, that spent the money to be there, are going to be on. Now, you can trade that same thing off for a desert location anywhere. It's still going to do it. But to do the Sephiroth of Set in Idaho in a cornfield, I mean, is it is it going to happen? You're going to have a car driving by, and you're going to be trying to summon certain entities, and you're going to need landscapes and so on and so on. But anything is possible. Anything is relative. I mean, it's just a matter of the efforts and not to have the drained location.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, that's why Crowley went to the deserts of Egypt to do his stuff.
Absolutely. Crowley avidly traveled, and he had that right on the mark. He traveled everywhere to keep himself rejuvenated, to refueling Gaia energy. He kept his results really inspirational. Also, there's a double-edged sword to that because you can burn yourself out, destroy yourself. But Crowley was an exceptional individual who was able to really burn hard and long and true and create a vast body of work, very ahead of his time. But he had some shortfalls too. But that is the ideal thing. Doing and conducting the ritual, for example, of H.P. Lovecraft's The Stars Are Right on a mountaintop while there is a lunar eclipse, and you have focused groups there, as many as 50, you're going to have a result if they're all on. And you know what? They don't even really have to be on. Even if you have a fraction of that, there will be something. And that is what's the part of the satanic paradigm that I wanted to key in.
Back to Crowley, you mentioned even though you write that Crowley would deny it himself, but you say that Crowley was a Satanist. Why do you say that?
People deny themselves. There are self-loathing homosexuals and self-loathing asexuals. They're self-loathing anything. And it doesn't matter if it's sexual proclivity or whatever. And there are also people that practice an art that they deny. And Crowley was one of them. Crowley was adamantly wanting to say, my mind's expanded. I have reached the light and I have reached the dark. He needs to realize, or at least from what I have taken from the majority of his work, it all leans really dark. And it's very Luciferian, very self-indulgent, very delved as well into the material realm. A lot of his statements completely contradict everything he ever talks about in regards to wanting to achieve Tetragrammaton, the holy guardian angel, and so on and so on. In reality, he wants evil. He wanted evil. He wanted, in his own words, he wanted anything bad or good, just strong. He wanted power, and it was satanic power. Even though he felt he was drawing from everything, he was really drawing from the dark power, from the entity of Luciferian Satan. The Abramelin ritual, which was a key ritual in Crowley's life, which he undertook partially until he got bored with it or was called away to help him and Mathers and some problems he was having, which he shouldn't have left and done. He shouldn't have done that because the Abramelin ritual is all about satanic incurrences. It has nothing to do with white light or power or good or any of that. It has everything to do with summoning devils to do your bidding, to aspire to a higher satanic consciousness, and to actually come in contact with Lucifer, with an angel of power that will intuit to you a secret energy. And that could be anything. That's, in a sense, if you ever survive the Abramelin ritual. This is just one example of Crowley Satanism, because the Abramelin ritual is all satanic energy. It is all Goetia. It is everything to do with summoning the devil. And he was in self-denial over it. And I think throughout his life he was in self-denial over it. And that's fine. It worked for him. And a lot of people question that. Is it really relevant? Probably not. I mean, Crowley is a very interesting, individual. But myself, personally, I think he was a preeminent Satanist. I think he borrowed precepts, for example, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, from his treatise, the Book of the Law, which was established in 1904 while he was in Egypt, in Cairo, was a borrowed statement. That statement was utilized by the Satanic Coven of the Hellfire Club. To enter into their soirees, they would say something very similar to it, like, do what thou wilt is the law. That is how you got in to their group, to worship Satan and to have sex with men or women and to do any kind of orgiastic experience you could ever want. Serpentist Dashwood was not a nice person. He would light cats on fire. He would embald women. He would shave their heads. He was not a nice person. He was a Satanist. He was self-proclaimed. There's a lot of secrecy about the Hellfire Club, what they did. I actually have some of that information that's going to be gleaned later about some of these activities that this group did. And Crowley revered them. Crowley revered this group. He revered anything that was to do with Satan.
And another very interesting about your book is you say, and I know a lot of people or a certain religion won't like this, but isn't it true that Gerald Gardner, the founder of Wicca, was influenced by Satanism?
Absolutely. I mean, modern witchcraft owes a lot to Crowley, who actually did write the Book of Shadows for Gardner. He was a practitioner of occult arts. He was totally anti-Christian. He leaned towards black magic initially, and then grew it into a more white light concept. But really for Gardner, it always stayed black magic. And he had ties with Crowley, and Crowley had severely influenced him. But he lacked the tenacity to create and write magic formulation. And I think that was one of his shortfalls. But one thing he was good at, Witchcraft Today was his magazine. And he had good with those taglines and the way he approached the media. He did good by it. But he very much so was a black magic magician. And he himself would deny that too. I call a spade a spade. And that's all I am generally with everyone, I mean, I see white light people that say, I'm only white light, and I'm like, yeah, well, I differ with you. I call it spade a spade. I mean, it really is true. I see them working black magic in denial. And that's fine. Whatever works for them. If they think they can make a difference in their real world by their type of projection, that's all that really matters. It's when you're trying to put some kind of stringent guideline on people and magic in general, which is avidly done by analytics and these armchair type of philosophers or academia. They're always trying to stringently guideline everything, like, this is this, and you're not allowed to deviate, and we have to stay in the box. Well, I mean, that's just not going to work. It becomes a waste of time. It's frivolous.
And another thing that's interesting about your book, The Satanic Paradigm, is that you use Lovecraft incorporated into satanic rituals and traditions. Why is Lovecraft considered a fiction writer important in Satanism?
Lovecraft was a satanic clairvoyant. There is not much known about Lovecraft because he was highly secretive. Why he is significant is because he believed in what he was writing, creating. When he was 5 years old, he had a series of visions from this creature or entity known as Alhazred, which is commonly known as the Muslim, not Muslim, but Arab priest that discovered the Necronomicon and had kept it encloaked and had written about it in his treatises and writings. But really, Alhazred to Howard Phillips Lovecraft was an entity, a spirit that spoke to him as a child. And his mother, Susan Lovecraft, trumped this up to being, at that time, HVL's fascination with the Arabian Nights novels and anything Arabian, because Arabia in general is very alluring and sensual. And Lovecraft as a child was attracted, and being in that attraction, he came in contact with entities. This also has to do with his father. His father was, during the 1800s, clearly insane. His father believed that he was plagued by entities himself that he would call the Old Horror, forces that were coming at him. He felt never alone in a room. He was committed, unfortunately, to an asylum, and this was real. And Susan wanted everything she could for her son, Phillips Lovecraft, to get him away from that. And that had a very searing response in Lovecraft's mind as well, to know that his father was committed, and they were in utter poverty. She was struggling. They had to move in with family members. There was a series of other events that happened to Lovecraft that, in his life, in a sense of shocks, installed within him an occult power, an occult willingness, an occult desire, an occult drive. And people want to say, oh, Lovecraft was just a sickly boy who, during the 1920s was interested in Latin or something. They're so far from the truth. That is so far from the truth. Lovecraft began to reach out to people through letters. He spoke and met and tried to get involved with the Weird Tales scene, which he did and accomplished to do so. He was an avid occultist. There is even rumors that he met and was involved with Aleister Crowley during his internment in New York City. Not internment, but more like his time when he lived there. But according to Lovecraft, it would be an internment because he lived off of Red Hook with his then-wife, Sonia Green. During that time of experience of Crowley, Lovecraft, Sonia Green, also that comes into play about Lovecraft's occultism and his draw into supernatural power was Houdini's writing of his work Under the Pyramid, which Lovecraft did for him as a ghostwriter. And during that connection, even moving a little bit ahead of Crowley and showing that Lovecraft was indeed an occultist, not just a supernatural fiction writer, Houdini definitely consulted with Lovecraft, and they had met often in Brooklyn and in Manhattan and discussing the seance work, the creatures from beyond the grave, the gargantuousness of the other realm, and so on, because Houdini was completely immersed in the occult. Aside from his magical experiences, which he had done to the general public and wanted to do, general shifts of hand and illusions and so on and so on, he was very much into it, and he had also made Lovecraft very much into it, and Sonia Green, who being Lovecraft's wife, was very much into it. So it was almost like you can see during that period, especially in New York City, a coven, in a sense, of real powerful figures coming together and sort of having some kind of connectivity there. And then moving on, of course, into Howard Phillips' breakdown and then death and so on. There's a lot to that involved in whether Lovecraft actually was murdered, and I know that's reaching slightly because there's not much known about that, but he died at a very young age, and there were people around him that wanted what he had, that wanted what he was doing, wanted his writings. They knew and saw a star, which he was, but he was broke. But for him to die suddenly, Derleth to just come out and say, I've got everything, I own Lovecraft. Sonia Green has disappeared. So there's a lot of intrigue, occult power, and sad events that played on into Lovecraft's life that make him a preeminent occult figure, which is very unknown, and it's still not over.
And another thing which I think very interesting is you write about most people know the pharaoh Akhenaten is considered the first monotheist in history, but you contend that he was a Satanist. Why do you say that?
When I traveled to Egypt, I had read some of the hieroglyphs, the actual physical hieroglyphs. I mean, it's not difficult to ascertain hieroglyphs, really, since the salt tablet was discovered, that bridge the gap from what hieroglyphics are and what they are today. In looking at it, and looking at Akhenaten, his name evokes a dark power, and that is very specific in certain aspects, maybe that came after him. Now, this is also a possibility. Akhenaten was demonized after his death, and so hence they would want to say, this man was Satan, do not follow him, his name has been ablated from history. Yet it is hard to determine unless I have carbon date material on me, and I'm not a full-on scientist, although I like to think I am. It's hard to determine which one was written when, and there are some certain hieroglyphics that state Akhenaten sought the monotheistic power through Set and other dark forces that wanted to bring down the sun god Ra, and so on and so on, and hence his name has been ablated from Egyptology in general. It is true that the general concept of Akhenaten is that he became pharaoh. His wife was Nefertiti, and I believe that later Nefertiti gave birth to Tutankhamun. That's a completely different concept, and I could be erring here. I'm not an Egyptologist. I just have some general information about Akhenaten. That when Akhenaten came to power, he had a vision, according to what I've read and studied over there. He had a vision of Aten. Aten, in the Transfiguration, was set to rise from what he considered, I guess, kind of just a group of morassed other gods that were irrelevant. And he wanted to cast down all the others and say that it was Aten, Sishian power, so on. And I hate using the term Sishian because I'm not involved with the Temple of Set at all, and they've kind of bastardized a lot of these concepts. And actually, I seriously doubt that they've ever been to Egypt or even know what I'm talking about right now. Yet, in looking at it, I think Akhenaten sought to bring down the sun god, create one god as some entity, in the sense that he was Satan to everyone. The priests of Ra rose against him. They were plotting against him. They murdered him, and then they destroyed any sign or trace of statues were destroyed. Certain inscriptions were scratched out, and there was a lot of just utter destruction of anything to do with Akhenaten. And that was really, I think, only the first time in the Egyptian history that's ever occurred. And in going there, the evidence that I had seen points to the fact that he was indeed practicing an evil force.
Well, I think that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and good luck with the Satanic Paradigm. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your new book coming out.
Yes, I'm writing a treatise of black magic, which is more of the same, because I guess I could not get enough in on the Satanic Paradigm. It's going to have new modern rituals in it, more philosophy overall. It should be done probably in about 2 months.
Well, good luck with your work, and hope to have you on soon when the book comes out.
All right, well, thank you very much.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Winter Lake on his new book, The Satanic Paradigm, and a brief but crisp excursion into the ideology of Diablo. Man, I miss playing that video game. A good yet dangerous read for any occultists, esotericists, and anyone seeking to address their shadow side or impersonal demons. And Winter is right. Orthodox Christianity may be evanescing, but the Demiurge isn't going to take this laying down.
He plays his games, we play ours.
While theists and atheists spend their time in courtrooms, homes, haggling over historical monuments, or defacing each other's billboards, Allah prepares the next opening of his Dark Ages amusement park. And you're the main event.
Those acts of God really stick it in and break it off, don't they?
Perhaps it won't be extremist Islam, but it will be something, and most of us won't even see it coming. As I threaten you before the interview, I will address the seeming similarities between Gnosticism and Satanism, many that Winter took care of, but what the fudge? Beyond the sneering of El Shaddai and acknowledgement of Kelipoth-like forces that drain on human essences, many Satanists do believe in the divine spark, a fight to break out of the world of forms, healthy syncretism, mystic walkabouts through the spheres of existence, and a reverence to fallen, outcast divine female principles. And since many followers of Hades draw from hermetical, alchemical, and astrological doctrines, their views will overlap with Gnosticism.
Klaatu, Veranda. Okay then. That's it.
I know there are neo-Gnostics who have an affinity to the morning star, but Gnosticism itself has never been too interested in Satan. The classic Gnostics took allegiance beyond creation with the Aeons that comprise the mind of depth and silence, the holy abyss where awareness came into being, and then they raged against heaven itself. And we took as our trickster deities Sophia and Jesus and Hermes, all who in our tradition can be fallen beings themselves. The character of Satan is barely mentioned in Gnostic scriptures, except for the Gospel of Truth and a few others.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Sure, the Cathars spoke of the adversary as being the polar brother of Jesus, but Satan was just a coded word for the Demiurge, St. Paul's god of this world, or, as the medieval heretics called him, the king of the world. Maybe his icon looked like James Cameron, who did a good job in destroying man's sanity with that swine flu called Dances with Smurfs. And yes, Jung, in The Seven Sermons of the Dead, does talk about Satan and God as two opposite supreme beings. But above them, of course, stands Abraxas, far more powerful, dangerous, and liberating. The true deconstructive energy, as well as the black hole of all that is and all that isn't. The terrible and only choice to escape the wheel of karma.
I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away.
Another connection might be some Gnostic sect's affinity for the serpent of the Garden of Eden, especially the Nassenes, Ophites, and Manichaeans. Some saw the serpent as Jesus or Sophia, but obviously in universal terms, the snake is the archetype for lunar wisdom, the kundalini potency of so many cultures, and again, that trickster deity that forces us to engage the fiery side of our makeup.
Fiery the angels fell. Deep thunder rolled around their shores, burning with the fires of orc.
Then there is also the issue of the mysterious Yazidi of the Middle East and their peacock angel, which we address in our Gnostic Knights Templar program with Mark Pinkham. Are they a Mandean-type Gnostic wing, or just a Muslim version of devil worshippers? Or perhaps both?
Godless buffoons, all of them.
One last semi-interesting similarity is that both Gnostics and Satanists see the number 888 as important. In Gematria, or Greek Kabbalah as it has been called, 888 symbolizes the cosmic Christ, while in Satanic numerology, it is a channel of power and portent. For an excellent comparison and contrast on Luciferianism and Gnosticism, I would read Lucifer the Lightbearer by by Aeon Byte's contributing author Jim West, which you can find in our archives at thegodabovegod.com. Many listeners have emailed me with the pros and cons, the politics and benefits, the silliness and nobleness of Satanism. But I'll leave it up to you, my beloved truth seekers. After all, and like I said early in the program, when you come to the domains of the perennial heretics, you will leave with more questions than answers, but questions that lead you to a higher state of consciousness and a fearsome awareness of all that is around you.
The truth is always the right answer.
That's why we run with those searching for the truth and avoid those who have found it. That's why divided we stand and together we rise. That's why we're the veterans of 1,000 psychic wars who have set the controls to the heart of the sun. That's why we sail the seas of fate through the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy, all the way to the farthest shores of imagination, where we will lose our minds and come to our senses. We are the Gnostics. We have begun a spiritual revolution in the name of Hypatia to get as many people out of Plato's cave and into the fields of Elysium. We will not accept a new boss as we rejected the old boss, and we won't get fooled again. We will not serve in heaven, neither reign in hell. We shine like the sun and the moon and the stars in the Aeons, helping others find the way to individuality, completely free and unhinged, limitless and unbound, forever in the bliss of just following our bliss with equality to one another. I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through, yes, thegodabovegod.com. The road is ended, the song is over, thought I'd have something more to say. But don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved truth seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that loved you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight. Hello and goodbye as always.